Hello there, and welcome to Sleep Science, where we explore fascinating science in a quiet, relaxing way that helps your mind unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin tonight's gentle journey, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. It's always wonderful to know where these quiet little science stories are drifting off to. Tonight, we're swimming into the shallow, ancient waters of Mexico to meet one of Earth's most extraordinary creatures, the axolotl. With their feathery gills, perpetual smile, and an almost magical ability to regrow lost body parts, these gentle water dwellers are living legends wrapped in soft, salamander skin. They're creatures that chose to stay young forever, that can rebuild their own brains, and that carry within their cells secrets we're only just beginning to understand. There's no need to follow every detail tonight. Just let these stories of regeneration and wonder wash over you like warm water, carrying you toward rest. So, settle in, close your eyes if you like, and let's take a slow, peaceful dive into the quietly astonishing world of the axolotl. Long before scientists gave it a Latin name, the axolotl was already divine. In the rich mythology of the Aztec people, this gentle creature held a place of honor in the very creation of the world, woven into stories of gods and sacrifice, transformation, and eternal life. The tale begins with the legend of the 5 suns, the Aztec creation myth that tells how our world came to be. 4 previous worlds had risen and fallen, each destroyed by the gods in cosmic catastrophes of wind, fire, and flood. But the 5th sun, our sun, was different. It was meant to be the final creation, the world where humans would live and thrive. Yet when it was first made, this sun refused to move across the sky. It hung there, motionless and cold, waiting. The gods gathered in council and realized what must be done. The sun needed nourishment, needed sacrifice to give it the strength to begin its eternal journey. And so, one by one, the gods threw themselves into the sacred fire, their divine essence feeding the newborn sun until it finally began to move, bringing light and warmth to the world. But there was one god who hesitated, Xolotl, the god of lightning and death, brother to the great Quetzalcoatl, looked at that hungry fire and decided he quite liked existing. Thank you very much. While his fellow gods marched bravely to their flaming fate, Xolotl ran, and not just anywhere, but into the most clever hiding places he could imagine. First, he transformed himself into a maize plant, thinking he could blend in among the crops. But the other gods found him. So he changed again, this time into an agave plant, hoping the sharp spines might keep seekers at bay. Still, they found him. Finally, in desperation, Xolotl dove into the waters of the Great Lake and transformed into something new entirely, a water monster with feathery gills and a broad, flat head, the axolotl. Even in this final form, he was discovered. But when his brother, Quetzalcoatl, came to claim him, he took pity. Instead of forcing Xolotl into the fire, he banished him to live forever in the dark waters as an axolotl, carrying within his transformed body the spirit of a god who chose to preserve life rather than surrender it. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? The idea that this smiling creature paddling through the shallows carries divine essence, that it chose eternal youth over death, transformation over surrender. The Aztecs saw something special in axolotls, something that set them apart from ordinary animals. They weren't just creatures of the lake, they were living reminders of the power of adaptation, of the wisdom sometimes found in refusing to accept what seems inevitable. And in a way, the myth captures something true about axolotls that science would only discover centuries later. They really are creatures that have chosen eternal youth, that have found a way to cheat time and keep the gifts of childhood throughout their lives. They really can transform themselves, not from God to animal, but from injury back to wholeness, regrowing what is lost with a patience that seems almost divine. The lake where Axolotl made his final transformation was likely Lake Xochimilco, part of a vast network of interconnected waters that surrounded the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. These were sacred waters where the floating gardens called chinampas created a Venice-like city of canals and islands. Here, among the water lilies and rushes, axolotls swam in the shadows of one of the world's great civilizations. The Aztecs knew these waters intimately. They farmed them, traveled them, built their temples alongside them. And they watched the axolotl, this gentle creature that seemed to smile as it moved through the depths, that kept its feathery gills like a crown, that never seemed to age or change. In a world where transformation was often violent, where gods demanded sacrifice and empires rose and fell, here was something peaceful and constant. The name axolotl itself comes from the Nahuatl language, meaning water dog or water monster, though monster seems far too harsh a word for something so benign. They were more like water sprites, gentle guardians of the lake, swimming reminders of the magic that could be found in choosing to remain soft in a hard world. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, they marveled at the great city of Tenochtitlan with its canals and floating gardens. But they probably barely noticed the small salamanders swimming beneath the surface, carrying in their cells the same spirit of persistence that had built this water city. The axolotl had been part of these waters long before humans arrived, and they continued their quiet existence as empires fell and new worlds were born above the surface. Today, as we watch an axolotl drift through the water with its perpetual expression of gentle curiosity, we can still feel an echo of that original myth. Here is a creature that chose life over death, youth over age, healing over suffering. A living reminder that sometimes the most profound wisdom comes not from grand gestures, but from the simple decision to keep swimming, to keep growing, to keep believing in the possibility of regeneration. Growing up, it seems, is entirely optional if you're an axolotl. While the rest of the salamander world eventually trades its gills for lungs and its underwater life for terrestrial adventures, axolotls have made a different choice. They've decided that childhood was quite nice, actually, and they'd like to keep it. Thank you very much. This remarkable trait is called neoteny, from the Greek words meaning to hold youth. It's the biological equivalent of Peter Pan, a refusal to grow up that, in the axolotl's case, has become their defining characteristic. They reach sexual maturity, they reproduce, they live full adult lives. They just do it all while keeping the body and features of a juvenile salamander. Picture an axolotl, if you will, and you'll see what eternal youth looks like. Those feathery external gills that wave like underwater ferns, catching oxygen from the water as they flutter in the current. That broad, flat head with its wide mouth that seems permanently curved into a gentle smile. The tail fin that ripples as they swim, and those delicate limbs with their long, slender digits. These are all juvenile features, the hallmarks of a salamander that hasn't yet metamorphosed. Most salamanders follow a predictable path. They hatch as aquatic larvae, spend their youth swimming and breathing through gills, then undergo a dramatic transformation. Their gills disappear, their lungs develop, their skin thickens, their tail fin is absorbed. They become terrestrial adults, ready to explore life on land. It's nature's version of a coming-of-age story, complete with a makeover montage. But axolotls looked at this whole process and decided it wasn't for them. They kept their gills, kept their tail fins, kept their smooth, permeable skin perfect for underwater life. They became sexually mature while still looking like teenagers, capable of reproduction while retaining all the features of youth. It's as if they found the perfect balance between responsibility and playfulness and decided to maintain it forever. This discovery came as quite a shock to early naturalists. When the first axolotls were shipped from Mexico to the prominent French zoologist Auguste Dumeril in the 1860s, he was certain he was looking at larvae, juvenile salamanders, obviously. He waited patiently for them to metamorphose, to develop into their adult form so he could properly classify this new species. Imagine his surprise when, 6 months later, his supposed larvae began laying eggs. Adult animals are defined by their ability to reproduce, so these egg-laying axolotls were, by definition, adults. But they looked nothing like adult salamanders. They looked like children who had decided to start families while still living in their childhood bedrooms, which, in a biological sense, is exactly what they were. This was only the beginning of the axolotl's ability to confound expectations. Dumeril's discovery launched decades of research into this phenomenon of neoteny, this strange ability to remain forever young while still growing old and wise. But here's where it gets even more interesting. While axolotls almost always remain neotenic, they don't absolutely have to. Under certain conditions, they can still undergo metamorphosis, transforming into a more traditional adult salamander form. It's as if they've kept the option open, like maintaining both a passport and a permanent residence, just in case. This transformation can be triggered by specific environmental conditions or hormonal changes. When exposed to thyroid hormones, axolotls will begin to metamorphose, losing their external gills, developing lungs, and taking on a more terrestrial appearance. It's like watching childhood melt away and fast forward, revealing the adult that was always hiding underneath. But these transformed axolotls are somewhat fragile, often shorter-lived than their neotenic cousins. It's as if the body wasn't really designed for this late-in-life makeover, as if they were happiest in their original, youthful form. The transformation is possible, but it's not necessarily beneficial. Sometimes, it seems, staying young really is the better choice. The environmental factors that favor neoteny in axolotls tell us something beautiful about adaptation. In the ancient lakes of Mexico, staying aquatic was actually an advantage. These were large, permanent bodies of water surrounded by harsh, dry land. The lakes had no major predators, stable temperatures, and plenty of food. Why leave paradise to struggle on land? Other salamander species in the region sometimes show this same flexibility, with some individuals remaining aquatic while others metamorphose and move to land. It's as if nature is running a constant experiment, trying both strategies to see which works better in any given environment. For axolotls, the experiment concluded that eternal youth was the winning strategy. They became so thoroughly adapted to their aquatic lifestyle that they lost most ability to survive on land. They became specialists in staying young, experts in the art of never growing up. There's something deeply appealing about this choice, isn't there? In a world that often seems to rush us toward maturity, toward responsibility and seriousness, axolotls remind us that there's wisdom in maintaining the flexibility and wonder of youth. They've kept their capacity for growth and healing, their openness to the world, their gentle curiosity about everything around them. They've also kept something else important, their ability to regenerate. And as we'll see, this talent for healing and regrowth may be intimately connected to their eternal youth. Perhaps by refusing to fully grow up, they've maintained the regenerative powers that most animals lose as they age. Perhaps staying young isn't just about appearance, but about keeping alive the body's memory of how to build itself anew. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, maybe carry with you some of the axolotl's gentle wisdom. The knowledge that growing older doesn't have to mean growing rigid, that maturity can coexist with wonder, and that sometimes the most sophisticated choice is to remain simple, soft, and endlessly curious about the world. Losing a limb is barely an inconvenience when you're built to rebuild. While most of us fret over paper cuts and nurse minor bruises with theatrical sighs, axolotls approach injury with the casual confidence of someone who knows they can simply grow back whatever gets damaged. It's perhaps the most extraordinary ability in the animal kingdom, and they do it with the kind of understated elegance that makes it look almost easy. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to have such confidence in your body's ability to heal. To know that if you lost a finger, an arm, even parts of your heart or brain, you could simply wait a few weeks and watch them grow back, good as new. For axolotls, this isn't fantasy, it's Tuesday. They can regenerate limbs with perfect precision, regrowing not just the basic structure, but every tiny bone, every muscle, every nerve, every blood vessel. The new limb isn't a crude approximation or a useful substitute. It's an exact copy of what was lost, complete down to the smallest detail. When the process is finished, you can't tell which limb is original and which is the replacement. It's biological photocopying at its finest. But limbs are just the beginning. Axolotls can regrow their tails, which might seem simple until you realize that a tail contains spinal cord, vertebrae, muscles, blood vessels, and nerves. They can regenerate parts of their hearts, portions of their livers, sections of their lungs. They can regrow damaged eyes, replacing not just the outer structures, but the delicate internal components, the lens, the retina, the complex neural connections that make vision possible. And then there's perhaps the most astonishing ability of all. They can regenerate parts of their brain and spinal cord. In mammals like us, damage to the central nervous system is usually permanent. Severed spinal cords don't heal, damaged brain tissue doesn't replace itself. Yet axolotls can repair injuries to their brains, regrow portions of their spinal cords, and restore function to damaged neural networks. It's like having a biological backup system that can restore not just structure, but consciousness itself. This isn't a slow, tentative process either. Axolotl regeneration happens with remarkable speed and efficiency. Within hours of an injury, the healing process begins. Within days, new tissue starts to form. Within weeks, the lost part is completely restored. They approach healing the way a master craftsperson approaches their work, with skill, patience, and an unshakable confidence in the outcome. The regeneration begins immediately after injury, but not in the way you might expect. There's no frantic rushing to patch things up, no desperate scrambling to stop the bleeding. Instead, there's something almost meditative about the process, a calm, methodical approach to reconstruction that unfolds like a slow dance. First, the wound is sealed and the bleeding stops, much as it would in any animal. But then something remarkable happens. Instead of forming scar tissue the way human wounds do, the cells near the injury site begin to change. They start to dedifferentiate, essentially forgetting what they were supposed to be. A muscle cell stops being a muscle cell. A bone cell stops being a bone cell. They become something more fundamental, stem cells, blank slates ready to become whatever the body needs. These dedifferentiated cells gather at the site of injury, forming a structure called the blastema, sometimes known as the regeneration bud. It's a small, cone-shaped cluster of undifferentiated cells that looks unremarkable but contains extraordinary potential. Within this humble little bump lies the blueprint for recreating whatever was lost. The blastema is like a biological time machine, taking adult cells and returning them to an embryonic state where anything is possible. The cells within it don't just replace what was there before, they remember the original plan, the developmental program that created the limb or organ in the first place. They're not patching or repairing, they're rebuilding from scratch, following the same genetic instructions that shaped the body during its first formation. Slowly, patiently, the cells in the blastema begin to specialize again. Some become bone cells, others become muscle, still others become nerve cells or blood vessel cells. They grow and divide and arrange themselves into increasingly complex structures, like a biological orchestra where every musician knows exactly when to come in and what part to play. Blood vessels sprout and branch, connecting the new tissue to the body's circulatory system. Nerves extend their delicate tendrils, re-establishing the communication networks that allow the brain to control movement and sensation. Muscles form and organize into the precise patterns needed for coordinated motion. Bones develop their proper shape and density, creating the structural framework for the new limb. And through it all, there's something almost peaceful about the process. There's no inflammation, no pain, no struggle. The body simply does what it knows how to do, rebuilding itself with the same quiet confidence it used to build itself in the first place. It's healing as meditation, reconstruction as art. What makes this even more remarkable is that axolotls don't seem to have special regeneration genes that other animals lack. They're working with essentially the same genetic toolkit that we have, the same basic instructions for building bodies and tissues. The difference isn't in what genes they have, but in how they use them, how they regulate and coordinate the complex symphony of cellular activity that regeneration requires. This gives scientists hope that the capacity for regeneration might not be entirely lost in humans, just dormant. Perhaps buried somewhere in our genetic code lies the same potential that axolotls access so easily. Perhaps what we've lost isn't the ability itself, but simply the knowledge of how to turn it on. For now, we can only watch in wonder as axolotls demonstrate possibilities that seem almost magical. They remind us that healing doesn't have to mean settling for less, that the body's capacity for renewal might be far greater than we ever imagined. They show us that sometimes the most profound abilities are also the most gentle, requiring not force or struggle, but simply the wisdom to remember what we once knew how to do. Hidden within every axolotl injury is a tiny biological time machine. It doesn't look like much at first, just a small pale bump forming at the site of damage, no bigger than a pinhead and about as remarkable looking as a minor skin irritation. But this humble structure, called the blastema, contains within it one of the most extraordinary secrets in all of biology, the ability to turn back time at the cellular level. The blastema is where the magic of regeneration really begins, though magic isn't quite the right word. It's more like the most sophisticated engineering project imaginable, carried out by cells that somehow remember exactly how they were built in the first place. It's development in reverse and then forward again, a biological do-over that most animals can only dream of. When an axolotl loses a limb, the first few hours look much like healing in any other animal. Blood clots form to stop the bleeding, and a thin layer of skin cells, called the wound epidermis, quickly grows across the surface of the injury. It's basic first aid, the body's way of saying, let's seal this up and figure out what to do next. But in an axolotl, what happens next is where things get interesting. While most animals would begin forming scar tissue, permanently marking the site of injury, axolotl cells near the wound begin to do something remarkable. They start forgetting what they're supposed to be. This process is called dedifferentiation, and it's like watching specialization run in reverse. A muscle cell that has spent its entire existence being muscular suddenly stops producing muscle proteins and starts behaving like a generic, uncommitted cell. A cartilage cell abandons its structural duties and becomes something more flexible, more open to possibilities. Bone cells, nerve cells, connective tissue cells all begin to shed their specific identities and return to a more primitive, embryonic state. It's as if the cells are saying, well, clearly our original plan didn't work out, so let's go back to the drawing board and start over. They become stem cells again, blank slates ready to be written on, cellular clay ready to be molded into whatever the situation requires. These dedifferentiated cells gather beneath the wound epidermis, forming the blastema. At first, it's just a loose collection of undifferentiated cells, but gradually it takes on a more organized structure. The blastema grows into a cone shape, with the tip pointing away from the body, as if it's reaching toward the future, toward the limb it will become. What's remarkable is that the blastema isn't just a random collection of generic cells. Somehow, it knows what it's supposed to rebuild. The cells within it carry a kind of positional memory, an understanding of where they are in three-dimensional space and what structures should exist in their particular location. They remember the blueprint, the original architectural plan that shaped the limb during embryonic development. This positional information is like having a detailed map and construction guide all rolled into one. The cells know whether they're at the tip of a finger or the middle of an arm, whether they should be forming bone or muscle or nerve tissue. They understand not just what to build, but when and where and in what order. It's biological GPS combined with the most sophisticated project management system imaginable. As the blastema continues to grow, the cells within it begin to make decisions about their futures. Some commit to becoming bone cells, others choose to become muscle. Still others decide to form the intricate networks of blood vessels that will nourish the growing tissue, or the delicate nerve pathways that will allow the brain to control the new limb. This process of redifferentiation happens gradually, like a photograph slowly developing in a darkroom. At first, all the cells look similar, but over time, distinct regions begin to emerge. The skeletal framework starts to take shape, muscles begin to organize into functional groups, and the complex three-dimensional structure of the limb begins to unfold. The timing of this process is exquisite. Cells don't all differentiate at once. They do it in a carefully orchestrated sequence that ensures everything fits together properly. Blood vessels form just when they're needed to supply oxygen and nutrients to growing tissues. Nerves extend their connections at precisely the right moment to innervate newly formed muscles. It's like watching a master choreographer coordinate a dance involving millions of performers, each one knowing exactly when to move and where to go. Throughout this process, there's constant communication between cells. They send chemical signals back and forth, coordinating their activities and ensuring that everyone stays on the same page. Growth factors, signaling proteins, and other molecular messengers create a rich network of cellular conversation, allowing the developing tissue to self-organize into the correct final form. What's perhaps most beautiful about the blastema is its patience. There's no rushing, no frantic activity, no sense of urgency. The cells take their time, building slowly and carefully, making sure each step is completed properly before moving on to the next. It's healing as meditation, reconstruction as art, biology as poetry in motion. The entire process takes several weeks, but the result is nothing short of miraculous, a perfect replacement for what was lost. Not similar, not functionally equivalent, but identical. The new limb moves with the same grace as the original, responds to the same neural commands, performs the same functions. If you were to examine it closely, you couldn't tell which parts were original and which were regenerated. And perhaps most remarkably, the regenerated limb retains the ability to regenerate again. If it's injured in the future, it can form another blastema, undergo another round of dedifferentiation and redifferentiation, and replace itself once more. The capacity for renewal isn't used up. It's renewable itself, a gift that keeps on giving. As scientists study the blastema, they're beginning to understand that regeneration isn't really about having special powers that other animals lack. It's about maintaining access to the same developmental programs that built the body in the first place. The axolotl hasn't invented new ways to make limbs. It's simply kept the instruction manual that most other animals have lost or forgotten how to read. While we nurse our headaches and worry about our memory, axolotls simply grow new brain cells. It's perhaps the most astonishing of their regenerative abilities, and certainly the one that makes neuroscientists lie awake at night wondering how they do it. In the realm of the nervous system, where most animals operate under strict no returns, no exchanges policies, axolotls have somehow maintained a lifetime warranty. The human brain, for all its remarkable capabilities, follows a rather pessimistic approach to injury. Damage a spinal cord, and it stays damaged. Lose brain tissue to stroke or trauma, and it's gone forever. Our neurons, those exquisitely specialized cells that carry thoughts and memories and dreams, generally don't replace themselves once we're past early childhood. It's as if the brain, having worked so hard to wire itself correctly during development, decides that any changes would be too risky. But axolotls look at this conservative approach and think, how limiting. They can regenerate not just brain tissue, but the spinal cord, the delicate neural networks that control movement and sensation, even the complex structures that process vision and hearing. They treat their nervous system like a garden that can always grow back, no matter how severely it's been pruned. This ability becomes even more remarkable when you consider what the brain actually is. It's not just a collection of cells, but a network of incredible complexity, with billions of neurons connected to each other through trillions of synapses. Each neuron can connect to thousands of others, creating circuits and pathways and feedback loops that somehow give rise to consciousness itself. The idea that such a structure could be rebuilt after damage seems almost impossible. Yet axolotls do it routinely. Remove a portion of their brain and they'll regenerate the missing tissue. Sever their spinal cord and they'll regrow the damaged sections and restore function. Damage the neural circuits that control movement and they'll rebuild the connections and resume normal behavior. They make neurosurgery look like routine maintenance. The process begins, as with other forms of axolotl regeneration, with the formation of a blastema. But in the case of neural tissue, this presents unique challenges. The nervous system is extraordinarily precise, with specific types of neurons positioned in exact locations, connected to specific targets through pathways that must be perfectly organized. It's not enough to simply grow more brain cells. They have to be the right kinds of cells in the right places, connected in the right ways. Somehow, axolotls manage this with the same calm competence they bring to limb regeneration. Neural stem cells within the damaged area begin to divide and differentiate, producing new neurons to replace those that were lost. But these aren't random neurons. They're the specific types needed for that particular location, complete with the proper molecular markers and functional characteristics. Even more remarkably, these new neurons manage to integrate themselves into existing neural circuits. They extend their axons and dendrites, the long projections that carry electrical signals, and form synapses with other neurons. They establish the precise connections needed to restore function, somehow knowing which other cells they're supposed to communicate with. This process of neural integration is still largely mysterious to scientists. How do new neurons know where to send their projections? How do they identify the correct targets among the millions of other cells in the nervous system? How do they establish the right patterns of connectivity that allow complex behaviors to resume? Part of the answer seems to lie in the remarkable guidance systems that neurons use during development. Young neurons growing in the embryonic brain follow chemical trails and molecular landmarks, like molecular GPS systems that guide them to their destinations. Axolotls appear to reactivate these guidance systems during regeneration, allowing new neurons to follow the same pathways that were established during original development. But there's more to it than simple navigation. The new neurons don't just reach their targets, they form functional connections. They begin participating in the complex patterns of electrical activity that characterize neural circuits. They contribute to behaviors, to sensory processing, to the myriad functions that depend on precise neural coordination. What makes this even more extraordinary is that axolotl neural regeneration isn't just about replacing lost tissue. The regenerated neural circuits actually work. Axolotls with regenerated brain tissue show normal behaviors. Those with regenerated spinal cords regain full motor function. The new neural networks aren't just anatomically correct, they're functionally integrated into the animal's behavioral repertoire. This suggests that axolotl brains retain something that mammalian brains appear to have lost: the ability to maintain plasticity throughout life. While our neural circuits become increasingly fixed as we age, axolotl brains remain flexible, capable of reorganization and renewal. They keep open the possibility of change, of growth, of starting over when necessary. Recent research has begun to identify some of the molecular mechanisms that make axolotl neural regeneration possible. Many of the same signaling pathways and growth factors that guide neural development in embryos are reactivated during regeneration. The axolotl brain, it seems, never quite forgets how it was built in the first place. There are also important differences in how axolotl neurons respond to injury. While mammalian neurons often die or become permanently dysfunctional after damage, axolotl neurons are more resilient. They can survive injuries that would be fatal to human neurons, and they retain the ability to regrow damaged projections and reform lost connections. This resilience extends to the cellular environment surrounding neurons. In mammals, injury to the nervous system often triggers inflammatory responses that can actually make damage worse. Scar tissue forms, creating barriers that prevent regeneration. But in axolotls, the injury response is different. Instead of inflammatory scarring, there's a coordinated regenerative response that supports healing rather than hindering it. The implications of axolotl neural regeneration for human medicine are profound. Spinal cord injuries, traumatic brain injuries, neurodegenerative diseases, all of these conditions might benefit from understanding how axolotls rebuild their nervous systems. If we could learn to reactivate even a fraction of their regenerative capacity, it could transform the treatment of neurological disorders. But perhaps there's a gentler lesson here as well. Axolotls remind us that the brain doesn't have to be a fixed, unchanging structure. It can be flexible, renewable, capable of growth and healing throughout life. In a world where we often worry about cognitive decline and neural aging, axolotls whisper a different possibility: that our minds, like their brains, might have hidden capacities for renewal and regeneration. Once upon a time, there was a lake so perfect that evolution decided to stop trying. It was a place where water and land danced together in gentle harmony, where floating gardens created a Venice of the new world, and where peculiar salamanders found conditions so ideal that they chose to abandon the very idea of growing up. This was Lake Xochimilco and its sister waters, a network of ancient lakes that once spread across the Valley of Mexico like scattered jewels. Picture, if you will, the world as it existed centuries ago. The valley was filled with a vast system of interconnected lakes, their shores fringed with rushes and water lilies, their surfaces dotted with the innovative floating gardens called chinampas. The water was clear and cool, fed by mountain springs and seasonal rains. There were no large predatory fish lurking in the depths, no industrial pollutants clouding the shallows, no urban sprawl crowding the shorelines. These lakes were something special, a unique ecological niche that existed nowhere else on Earth. They were large enough to provide stable habitat, permanent enough to support species that committed fully to aquatic life, and isolated enough by the surrounding mountains and desert that they developed their own evolutionary stories. The water was slightly alkaline, with a pH that perfectly suited the salamanders living there. The temperature was moderate and stable, never too hot in summer, nor too cold in winter. But perhaps most importantly, these lakes had no major predators. In most aquatic environments, staying small and juvenile-looking is a good way to end up as someone's lunch. Large fish, aquatic birds, and other predators tend to see juvenile amphibians as convenient snack foods. But the Mexican lake system was different. It was a relatively peaceful place, where staying small and delicate wasn't a death sentence, but a lifestyle choice. This unique combination of factors created what biologists call a relaxed selection pressure for metamorphosis. In most environments, salamanders need to metamorphose to escape aquatic predators or to take advantage of terrestrial food sources. But in these perfect lakes, there was no rush to leave the water. Food was abundant, predators were few, and the living was easy. Why go through the stress and energy cost of metamorphosis when you could simply stay put and enjoy paradise? The lakes were also home to the Aztec civilization, which had developed one of the most sophisticated aquaculture systems in human history. The chinampas, often called floating gardens, were actually artificial islands created by piling mud and vegetation on shallow areas of the lake. These created a network of canals and waterways that turned the entire lake system into a productive agricultural landscape. The Aztecs understood water in ways that seem almost mystical to modern minds. They knew how to read the subtle signs of current and tide, how to predict the seasonal fluctuations that brought life-giving silt and nutrients. They created a civilization that worked with water rather than against it, that saw the lakes not as obstacles to development, but as partners in creating abundance. In this watery world, axolotls thrived. They swam through the canal systems, probably hiding among the roots of the floating gardens, feeding on small fish and aquatic invertebrates. They became part of the ecosystem that sustained both the natural world and human civilization. The Aztecs knew them well, incorporated them into their mythology, and probably harvested them for food. Archaeological evidence suggests that axolotls were a regular part of the pre-Columbian diet. The lake system was vast, covering much of what is now Mexico City. Lake Texcoco was the largest, a sprawling body of water that dominated the Central Valley. Lake Xochimilco, where axolotls were most abundant, was in the south, fed by freshwater springs that kept it clear and sweet. Other smaller lakes filled the spaces between, connected by natural channels and artificial canals that allowed boats to travel throughout the region. This aquatic paradise supported not just axolotls but an incredible diversity of life. Waterbirds filled the skies in seasonal migrations that must have been breathtaking to witness. Fish, frogs, aquatic insects, and countless other species found niches in the complex ecosystem. The lakes were living systems, pulsing with the rhythms of life and season, birth and death, flood and drought. But the lakes also represented something more, a different way of imagining the relationship between water and land, between wild and civilized, between human needs and natural systems. The Aztecs didn't see the lakes as problems to be solved or resources to be exploited. They saw them as partners in creating a sustainable civilization. The Spanish conquest changed everything. The new colonial government, accustomed to land-based agriculture and European-style cities, saw the lakes as obstacles to proper development. Over the following centuries, most of the lake system was drained to prevent flooding and to create space for urban expansion. The sophisticated Chinampas system was largely abandoned in favor of conventional farming and eventually urban development. What had taken thousands of years to evolve was undone in just a few centuries. The vast lake system that had supported both human civilization and unique species like the axolotl was reduced to a few scattered canals and remnant wetlands. Lake Xochimilco, once part of a vast aquatic ecosystem, became a fragment of its former self, surrounded by one of the world's largest cities. But the axolotls remained, at least for a while. They continued to swim in the remaining canals of Xochimilco, carrying with them the genetic memory of that ancient paradise. They were living reminders of what the valley had once been, biological ambassadors from a lost world where water and land existed in perfect balance. Today, when we see an axolotl swimming in a laboratory tank or home aquarium, we're looking at a creature that evolved in paradise. Their eternal youth, their remarkable regenerative abilities, their gentle nature, all of these traits were shaped by millions of years in those perfect lakes. They are evolution's children of abundance, creatures that developed in a world where survival was easy enough that they could afford to remain forever young, forever curious, forever capable of healing. Paradise, it turns out, is surprisingly fragile. The same lakes that had nurtured axolotls for millions of years began to change in ways that would challenge even their remarkable ability to adapt. What had once been a perfect world slowly became a struggle for survival, and the gentle creatures that had thrived in abundance found themselves facing challenges that no amount of regeneration could overcome. The decline began gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. The Great Lake system that had once spread across the Valley of Mexico was slowly drained, one section at a time, as the growing human population needed more land for agriculture and urban development. By the early 20th century, most of the original lakes were gone, replaced by neighborhoods and farms and the sprawling infrastructure of a modern city. Lake Xochimilco, the last stronghold of the wild axolotl, managed to survive longer than its sister lakes, but even it was dramatically reduced in size. What had once been a substantial body of water became a network of canals, channels, and small lagoons. The floating gardens of the Chinampas were still there, maintained by local farmers who understood their cultural and agricultural value, but the ecosystem around them was under increasing pressure. The water began to change. Urban runoff brought pollution, agricultural chemicals seeped in from surrounding farmland, and the increasing population put pressure on water quality in ways that the ancient ecosystem had never experienced. The clear, clean water that had once supported abundant life became murky and increasingly toxic. But perhaps the most devastating change was the introduction of invasive species. Large fish like carp and tilapia were brought into the lake system, either accidentally or as part of aquaculture projects. These fish were efficient predators and competitors that the native ecosystem had never encountered. They ate axolotl eggs and juveniles, competed for food resources, and generally disrupted the delicate balance that had allowed axolotls to thrive. The numbers tell a heartbreaking story. In 1998, surveys found approximately 6,000 axolotls per square kilometer in Lake Xochimilco. That might not sound like a lot, but for a species that had evolved in these specific conditions, it represented a healthy, sustainable population. The lakes were still home to their ancient inhabitants. But by 2015, just 17 years later, that number had plummeted to 35 individuals per square kilometer, a decline of over 99% in less than 2 decades. It was an ecological catastrophe unfolding in slow motion, the end of an evolutionary story that had been millions of years in the making. The remaining axolotls struggled to survive in an environment that was becoming increasingly hostile. The polluted water made them more susceptible to disease. The invasive fish ate their food and their offspring. The warming climate changed the temperature and oxygen levels of the water in ways that stressed their physiology. They were trying to live in a world that no longer resembled the paradise where they had evolved. Scientists predicted that wild axolotls would be extinct by 2020. It seemed inevitable, given the rapid pace of decline and the multiple pressures facing the remaining population. The species that had survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions, that had adapted to gradual climate changes over millions of years, seemed unable to cope with the rapid transformations that human activity had brought to their environment. But extinction predictions are tricky things, and axolotls have always been full of surprises. They managed to persist, clinging to existence in the most degraded corners of their former habitat. A few dozen here, a few dozen there, scattered through the canal system like biological refugees from a lost world. Recent surveys have found small populations still surviving, though their numbers remain critically low. They're like the last speakers of a dying language, carrying within their genes the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of evolution in the Mexican lakes. Each individual represents an irreplaceable piece of biological heritage, a living link to an ecosystem that no longer exists. The axolotls that remain in the wild face challenges their ancestors never imagined. They must navigate waters clouded with pollutants, compete with invasive species that their instincts don't recognize as threats, and reproduce in an environment where their eggs and larvae often don't survive to adulthood. They're trying to follow evolutionary scripts that no longer match their environment. Yet, somehow, they persist. Their remarkable regenerative abilities, their flexibility, their gentle persistence serve them well even in these degraded conditions. They continue to breed, to produce offspring, to carry forward the genetic legacy of their species. They're survivors in the truest sense, holding on to life in circumstances that would have defeated less resilient creatures. The story of wild axolotl decline is part of a larger pattern happening around the world, where unique species adapted to specific environments find themselves unable to cope with rapid human-caused changes. But it's also a story about the unexpected resilience of life, about the way living things can sometimes persist against impossible odds. The remaining wild axolotls are living symbols of both loss and hope. They represent what we've lost, the vast, complex ecosystem that once filled the Valley of Mexico with life and abundance. But they also represent what might still be saved, the possibility that even critically endangered species can find ways to survive if we're willing to help them. Their struggle continues in the murky canals of Xochimilco, where every day is a small victory against extinction. They swim through polluted water with the same gentle grace their ancestors showed in crystal-clear lakes. They regenerate damaged tissue in an environment that damages them repeatedly. They persist because persistence is what they do, what they've always done, what they'll continue to do for as long as there's water to swim in and hope to carry forward. In their quiet struggle for survival, they remind us that paradise lost doesn't necessarily mean life lost. Sometimes it just means life changed, life adapted, life continuing in whatever form is possible. And sometimes, with help and hope and human determination, paradise might even be found again. Somewhere in the world right now, an axolotl is helping solve a medical mystery. In research laboratories from Boston to Beijing, from London to Lyon, these gentle salamanders are quietly contributing to humanity's understanding of development, disease, and healing. They've become the aristocracy of research animals, beloved by scientists not just for their remarkable abilities, but for their cooperative nature and ease of care. It's one of the great ironies of conservation. While wild axolotls teeter on the brink of extinction in their native lakes, laboratory axolotls have never been more abundant or more important. They've been called the white mice of amphibians, a reference to their ubiquity in research settings and their willingness to participate in scientific endeavors with remarkable patience. This transformation from lake dweller to laboratory royalty began in the early 1900s, when researchers first recognized the potential of axolotl regeneration for understanding fundamental biological processes. Here was an animal that could regrow complex body parts, that remained in a juvenile state throughout its life, that reproduced reliably in captivity and thrived on simple diets. From a research perspective, they were nearly perfect. Unlike many experimental animals, axolotls seem genuinely comfortable in laboratory settings. They adapt well to life in tanks, accept artificial diets, and breed readily in captivity. They don't require complex environmental enrichment or sophisticated life support systems. A simple aquarium with clean, cool water and regular feeding is enough to keep them healthy and content. They're low-maintenance research partners, the kind of collaborators every scientist dreams of working with. Their reproductive biology makes them particularly valuable for developmental studies. Axolotls lay large, transparent eggs that develop externally, allowing researchers to watch embryonic development in real time. You can literally observe a single cell dividing and organizing itself into a complex, multicellular organism. It's like having a window into one of biology's greatest mysteries. How simple beginnings give rise to extraordinary complexity. The eggs are large enough to manipulate experimentally, tough enough to survive laboratory procedures, and clear enough that internal structures are visible throughout development. Researchers can inject substances into developing embryos, transplant cells from one embryo to another, or use genetic tools to alter specific genes and observe the results. It's made axolotls indispensable for understanding how bodies build themselves. But it's the regeneration research that has really made axolotls famous in scientific circles. Their ability to regrow limbs, organs, and neural tissue has provided insights into healing that would be impossible to gain from any other animal. Every severed axolotl limb in a research setting represents a step toward understanding how regeneration works, how it might be enhanced, and how it could potentially be applied to human medicine. Laboratory axolotls have contributed to breakthroughs in understanding stem cell biology, tissue engineering, and regenerative medicine. They've helped identify the molecular signals that control healing, the genetic programs that guide tissue formation, and the cellular mechanisms that maintain regenerative capacity throughout life. Their generous participation in research has advanced human knowledge in ways that could eventually benefit millions of people. They've also become important models for studying aging and disease. Because they maintain juvenile characteristics throughout their lives, they offer unique insights into the relationship between development and aging. Some researchers believe that understanding axolotl neoteny could help us learn how to maintain youthful regenerative capacity in humans as we age. The global population of laboratory axolotls now numbers in the tens of thousands, distributed across research institutions worldwide. They've been bred in captivity for over a century, with some laboratory lineages tracing their ancestry back to the original specimens collected in Mexico in the 1800s. These captive populations represent genetic resources that are arguably more secure than the remaining wild populations. Different laboratories have developed specialized strains of axolotls for different types of research. Some strains have been selected for particularly robust regenerative abilities, others for specific genetic markers that make them useful for developmental studies. There are even genetically modified axolotls that express fluorescent proteins, allowing researchers to track specific cell types during regeneration and development. The care and breeding of laboratory axolotls has become a specialized field in itself. Research institutions maintain dedicated axolotl facilities with carefully controlled water quality, temperature, and lighting. Professional axolotl husbandry specialists ensure that the animals receive proper nutrition, veterinary care, and environmental conditions. It's a level of attention and care that would probably amaze the wild axolotls struggling to survive in polluted canals. Yet, this success in the laboratory highlights a troubling paradox. The same species that thrives in research settings that contributes so generously to human knowledge and potential medical breakthroughs is disappearing from its natural habitat. Laboratory axolotls are abundant and secure, but they're living in a completely artificial environment, sustained by human care rather than natural ecosystems. There's also the question of genetic diversity. While laboratory populations are large, they're descended from a relatively small number of founding individuals collected over a century ago. Generations of breeding in captivity, sometimes crossed with related tiger salamanders to maintain vigor, have created populations that may be genetically distinct from their wild ancestors. They're still axolotls, but they may not be quite the same axolotls that evolved in the ancient Mexican lakes. This genetic drift has practical implications for both research and conservation. Laboratory axolotls may not perfectly represent the biology of wild axolotls, potentially limiting the applicability of research findings. And if wild populations do go extinct, the laboratory populations might not be suitable for reintroduction efforts, as they may lack the genetic adaptations needed for survival in natural conditions. Still, the success of axolotls in laboratory settings represents something important: a partnership between humans and animals in the pursuit of knowledge. These gentle salamanders have become willing participants in humanity's quest to understand life itself. They've given generously of themselves, contributing to discoveries that could eventually help both humans and other species. In research laboratories around the world, axolotls continue their quiet work of healing and growing, revealing their secrets to scientists patient enough to watch and wonder. They're ambassadors from the natural world, carrying messages about the possibilities inherent in life, the potential for renewal and regeneration that exists within living systems. Their laboratory success offers hope that even if wild populations are lost, the essential wisdom of the axolotl, the biological knowledge encoded in their genes, will survive. They've become more than research subjects. They've become teachers, showing us possibilities we never knew existed, and inspiring us to dream of a future where healing is as natural as breathing. Inside every axolotl cell lies a library 30 times larger than our own. It's a vast collection of genetic information, a biological database so extensive that scientists are still working to understand what all those genes actually do. The axolotl genome is enormous, containing roughly 32 billion base pairs of DNA compared to our modest 3 billion. It's like comparing a comprehensive encyclopedia to a pocket dictionary, both containing the instructions for complex life, but one with far more detailed annotations. This genetic abundance was one of the first surprises that emerged from modern axolotl research. When scientists began sequencing the axolotl genome, they expected to find special regeneration genes, unique sequences that would explain their extraordinary healing abilities. Instead, they found something more subtle and perhaps more remarkable. Axolotls don't really have genes that other animals lack. They just use the genes they have in different ways. It's a bit like discovering that a master chef doesn't have access to exotic ingredients that the rest of us can't find. Instead, they're just extraordinarily skilled at combining common ingredients in ways that create extraordinary results. The axolotls' regenerative superpowers come not from having special genetic tools, but from having retained the knowledge of how to use ordinary genetic tools in extraordinary ways. This revelation has profound implications for regenerative medicine. If axolotls were using completely unique genes to regenerate, it would be difficult to apply their biology to human healing. We simply don't have those genes. But if they're using genes similar to ones we already possess, just regulating them differently, then their regenerative abilities might be more accessible than we thought. The key seems to lie in gene regulation, the complex system of molecular switches and signals that determine when and where genes are turned on or off. It's like having a vast orchestra where every musician has the same basic instruments, but the conductor decides when each section plays, how loudly, and in what combinations. The music that emerges depends not on having special instruments, but on the skill of the conductor. In axolotls, the genetic conductors that control regeneration appear to have maintained their skills throughout the animal's life. When injury occurs, they can reactivate the same genetic programs that built the body during embryonic development. They can turn adult cells back into stem cells, coordinate the complex dance of tissue formation, and rebuild lost structures with precision that seems almost magical. This process of genetic reprogramming is what allows axolotl cells to dedifferentiate, to forget their adult identities and return to a more primitive, flexible state. A muscle cell can become a stem cell, which can then become bone, cartilage, nerve, or blood vessel, depending on what the regenerating tissue needs. It's like cellular amnesia followed by cellular education, a biological reset that allows the body to rebuild itself. The signals that control this reprogramming are beginning to be understood. Growth factors, signaling proteins, and regulatory molecules work together to create the cellular environment needed for regeneration. Many of these molecules are ones that mammals also possess, but we seem to have lost the ability to coordinate them in the precise ways that regeneration requires. For example, researchers have identified several signaling pathways that are crucial for axolotl regeneration. The Want pathway, which helps control cell fate decisions. The FGF pathway, which promotes cell growth and division. The BMP pathway, which influences tissue patterning. These are all pathways that exist in human cells as well, but they're not activated in the same coordinated fashion when we're injured. There's also evidence that axolotls have maintained better access to their embryonic genetic programs throughout their lives. While human cells gradually lose the ability to express many developmental genes as we age, axolotl cells seem to keep these programs accessible, ready to be reactivated when needed. It's as if they've kept the instruction manuals that we've filed away and forgotten how to read. The massive size of the axolotl genome may play a role in this genetic flexibility. With so much DNA, there's plenty of room for redundancy, for multiple copies of important genes, for elaborate regulatory networks that can fine-tune gene expression in complex ways. It's genetic abundance rather than genetic efficiency, but it may provide the regulatory flexibility that regeneration requires. Interestingly, much of the axolotl's extra DNA consists of repetitive sequences and transposable elements, pieces of genetic material that can move around within the genome. While this might seem like biological junk, some researchers think these elements might play important roles in gene regulation, creating the complex genetic landscapes that allow for such precise control over regeneration. The study of axolotl genetics is also revealing clues about why most animals lose regenerative ability as they age. It appears that the genetic programs for regeneration don't disappear, they just get turned off or become inaccessible. The cellular machinery for rebuilding tissues remains present in adult cells, but it's no longer activated by injury. This suggests that the capacity for regeneration might still exist in human cells, dormant but not destroyed. If scientists could learn to reactivate these sleeping genetic programs, it might be possible to restore regenerative abilities to human tissues. The axolotl genome is like a genetic time capsule, preserving ancient abilities that most animals have lost, but that might yet be recovered. Recent advances in genetic engineering are making it possible to test these ideas experimentally. Researchers can now introduce axolotl genes into mammalian cells or modify human cells to express genes in axolotl-like patterns. Early experiments have shown some promising results, with mammalian cells gaining enhanced regenerative abilities when treated with axolotl genetic factors. But perhaps the most important lesson from axolotl genetics is that regeneration isn't really about having special powers. It's about maintaining access to the fundamental biological programs that built us in the first place. We all started as single cells that knew how to become complex, multicellular organisms. The information needed to build bodies, to heal tissues, to coordinate complex development is already written in our genetic code. Axolotls have simply kept the ability to read that code throughout their lives, to access the genetic wisdom that guided their original development and use it to guide their ongoing regeneration. They remind us that the capacity for renewal and healing isn't something exotic or foreign. It's something fundamental to life itself, something we once knew how to do and might, with patience and understanding, learn to do again. Every severed axolotl limb whispers a promise of what medicine might become. In research laboratories around the world, scientists are working to translate the gentle wisdom of axolotl healing into treatments that could transform human medicine. It's a quest that begins in the quiet waters of Mexican lakes and leads to the frontiers of regenerative medicine, where the impossible gradually becomes inevitable. The promise is both simple and profound. If we can understand how axolotls regenerate, we might be able to help human bodies do the same. The implications stretch across medicine, from treating traumatic injuries to addressing degenerative diseases, from healing damaged organs to restoring function after stroke or spinal cord injury. It's the dream of medicine made whole, of healing that rebuilds rather than merely repairs. But translating axolotl biology into human medicine is like learning to speak a language that evolution wrote over millions of years. The basic vocabulary might be similar, the fundamental biological processes that govern healing and regeneration, but the grammar is different, the way genes are regulated and coordinated in response to injury. One of the most promising areas of research focuses on the molecules that axolotls use to coordinate regeneration. Scientists have identified growth factors, signaling proteins, and regulatory molecules that seem crucial for the regenerative process. Many of these molecules are ones that human bodies also produce, but we don't seem to use them in the same coordinated, effective ways. Take macrophages, for example. These immune cells play important roles in both human and axolotl healing, helping to clean up damaged tissue and coordinate the early stages of repair. But in axolotls, macrophages seem to do something extra. They help create the cellular environment needed for regeneration, producing signals that encourage nearby cells to dedifferentiate and form the blastema that rebuilds lost tissue. Researchers have found that if you eliminate macrophages from an axolotl before amputating a limb, the animal forms scar tissue instead of regenerating. The macrophages aren't just cleaning up the damage, they're actively promoting regeneration. This suggests that enhancing macrophage function in humans might improve our healing capacity. Another promising target is transforming growth factor beta, a protein that plays crucial roles in both axolotl regeneration and human embryonic healing. In human embryos during the first trimester, this molecule helps prevent scar formation and promotes perfect healing. But we lose this ability as we age, developing more and more scar tissue in response to injury. Understanding how axolotls maintain effective TGF-beta signaling throughout their lives might help us restore scar-free healing in humans. There's also growing interest in the stem cell biology of regeneration. Axolotls can turn ordinary adult cells back into stem cells, giving them the flexibility to become whatever the healing tissue needs. Human bodies retain some stem cells throughout life, but they're more limited in their abilities and become less active as we age. If we could learn to enhance stem cell function or to reprogram adult cells the way axolotls do, it could revolutionize treatment for a wide range of conditions. Some of the most exciting research involves studying the few examples of regeneration that humans can still perform. We can regrow fingertips under certain conditions, particularly in young children. The cells responsible for this regeneration appear to be stem cells located beneath the fingernail, cells that normally help nails grow continuously throughout life. These human regenerative stem cells use many of the same molecular pathways that drive axolotl regeneration. The WNT and FGF signaling systems, the same growth factors and regulatory proteins, the same basic biological machinery. It suggests that we haven't entirely lost our regenerative abilities. We've just lost the ability to coordinate them effectively. Researchers are also learning from the unique environment that axolotls create around regenerating tissue. Instead of the inflammatory response that characterizes human wound healing, axolotls generate a more controlled, coordinated cellular environment that supports regeneration rather than simply sealing wounds. Understanding how to modulate human inflammatory responses might be key to enhancing our healing capacity. The field of tissue engineering is drawing heavily on axolotl research, trying to create artificial environments that mimic the conditions present in regenerating axolotl tissue. Scientists are developing scaffolds, growth factor cocktails, and cellular therapies designed to recreate the blastema-like conditions that drive regeneration. Some early clinical applications are already showing promise. Treatments that enhance the body's natural healing responses, therapies that recruit stem cells to sites of injury, approaches that modulate inflammation to promote regeneration rather than scarring. While we're still far from being able to regrow limbs like axolotls, we're beginning to see improved healing in conditions ranging from heart attacks to spinal cord injuries. The regeneration of neural tissue presents particular challenges and opportunities. The human nervous system has very limited regenerative capacity, but axolotl research is revealing why this might be the case and how it might be overcome. The molecular signals that guide neural regeneration in axolotls are beginning to be understood, and some of them are being tested in treatments for neurological injuries. Perhaps, most importantly, axolotl research is changing how we think about healing itself. Instead of accepting that significant injuries result in permanent disability, that damaged organs can't be repaired, that the body's healing capacity is fixed and limited, we're beginning to imagine a different kind of medicine, one where healing is more complete, where the body's own regenerative capacity can be awakened and enhanced. This vision of regenerative medicine isn't just about treating disease, it's about restoring wholeness. It's medicine that doesn't just save lives but restores quality of life, that doesn't just prevent death but promotes flourishing. It's healing that reaches toward the gentle completeness that axolotls achieve so naturally. The path from axolotl regeneration to human therapy will likely be long and complex, requiring years of careful research and testing. But every step along that path brings us closer to a future where the promise whispered by every regenerating axolotl limb becomes reality for human patients. Where the gentle wisdom of these remarkable salamanders becomes a gift to all of us, a reminder that healing doesn't have to mean settling for less, that the body's capacity for renewal might be far greater than we ever imagined. While we hold our breath underwater, axolotls simply smile and keep breathing. It's one of their most charming features, those feathery external gills that wave gently in the current like underwater ferns, extracting oxygen from water with the same ease that we draw it from air. They've turned what seems impossible to us into something as natural as, well, breathing. Those gills are works of art, delicate structures that look almost too fragile for the important work they do. Each gill consists of numerous branching filaments, creating an enormous surface area packed into a relatively small space. The filaments are richly supplied with blood vessels, allowing oxygen to pass directly from the water into the bloodstream while carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction. The gills are external, protruding from either side of the head like organic sculptures. This external placement makes them vulnerable to damage, but it also makes them incredibly efficient. Water flows directly over the respiratory surfaces, and the gills can move to optimize this flow. Axolotls can wiggle their gills, adjust their position, even use them for gentle propulsion when swimming. Watching an axolotl breathe is oddly mesmerizing. The gills pulse rhythmically as water flows over them, and you can sometimes see the delicate filaments responding to changes in water current or oxygen levels. When water is well oxygenated, the gills may appear relaxed and extended. When oxygen levels drop, they become more active, working harder to extract what they need from their aquatic environment. But axolotls don't rely entirely on their gills for respiration. They also have lungs, simple but functional organs that allow them to breathe air when necessary. Occasionally, you'll see an axolotl rise to the surface and gulp air, supplementing the oxygen they're getting through their gills. It's like having both scuba gear and snorkeling equipment built into the same body. This dual respiratory system gives axolotls remarkable flexibility. In well-oxygenated water, they can rely primarily on their gills. In stagnant or oxygen-poor water, they can supplement with air breathing. They can even survive for short periods in very shallow water or on moist surfaces, though they're much happier fully submerged. The efficiency of axolotl gills is remarkable. They can extract oxygen from water so effectively that they can thrive in conditions that would stress other aquatic animals. This efficiency comes partly from the large surface area of the gill filaments, but also from the way blood flows through the gills in a counter-current pattern that maximizes oxygen extraction. Their gills also play a role in osmoregulation, helping to maintain the proper balance of salts and water in their bodies. The same structures that extract oxygen also help manage the constant challenge of living in an aquatic environment where water is always trying to move in and out of their bodies through osmosis. Perhaps most remarkably, axolotl gills can regenerate. If damaged by injury or disease, they can regrow, restoring both their complex structure and their vital function. It's regeneration of one of the body's most delicate and essential organs, accomplished with the same patient precision that axolotls bring to rebuilding limbs or other tissues. The water that flows over those gills carries more than just oxygen and carbon dioxide. It brings chemical information about the environment, dissolved substances that the axolotl can detect and interpret. Their gills and associated sensory systems can pick up chemical signals from food, from other axolotls, from potential threats or changes in their environment. This makes the gills part of a larger sensory system that keeps axolotls informed about their aquatic world. They can detect the faintest chemical traces, following scent trails through the water with impressive precision. It's like having a chemical internet flowing constantly over their respiratory surfaces, providing real-time updates about everything happening in their watery neighborhood. The movement of water over the gills also provides mechanical information. Axolotls can sense water currents, pressure changes, even the movements of other animals through the vibrations and flow patterns that reach their gills. They're reading the water like we might read facial expressions, gathering information about their environment through the same structures they use for breathing. During the breeding season, the gills become even more important for communication. Male axolotls perform courtship displays that create specific water movements, patterns that females can detect through their gill sensory systems. The gills become part of an elaborate underwater communication system, transmitting romantic messages through currents and chemical signals. The eternal nature of axolotl gills is part of what makes their neoteny so remarkable. Most salamanders would have absorbed these structures during metamorphosis, replacing them with lungs and adapting to terrestrial life. But axolotls chose to keep their gills, to remain aquatic specialists throughout their lives. This choice reflects the unique evolutionary pressures of their lake environment. In stable, predator-free waters with abundant food, there was no advantage to leaving the aquatic realm. The gills that served them well as juveniles continued to serve them as adults. Why fix what isn't broken? Why abandon a respiratory system that works perfectly for your lifestyle? Their commitment to gill breathing also influences other aspects of their biology. Their blood chemistry is adapted for extracting oxygen from water rather than air. Their circulation patterns are optimized for gill respiration. Their behavior patterns, their habitat preferences, their entire way of life reflects their choice to remain forever aquatic. In laboratory settings, axolotls sometimes surprise researchers with their respiratory adaptability. They can adjust their breathing patterns based on water temperature, oxygen levels, even the time of day. They seem to have a sophisticated understanding of their own respiratory needs and the ability to meet them under a wide range of conditions. The sight of an axolotl breathing peacefully underwater, its gills moving gently in the current, has something deeply calming about it. There's a rhythm to it, a meditative quality that speaks to the fundamental importance of breath in all living things. They remind us that life finds many ways to extract what it needs from the environment, that the basic requirements of existence can be met through paths very different from our own. Their gills are windows into a different way of being in the world, a reminder that the boundary between self and environment can be beautifully permeable. Every breath an axolotl takes brings the world into its body, and every exhalation releases part of itself back into the world. They live in intimate connection with their environment, breathing it in and breathing it out in an endless cycle of exchange. The same water that once reflected Aztec pyramids now struggles to reflect the sky. Lake Xochimilco, the last stronghold of wild axolotls, bears little resemblance to the pristine waterways that nurtured these creatures for millions of years. Today's lake tells a different story, one of resilience and adaptation in the face of challenges that evolution never prepared any species to face. The transformation has been gradual but relentless. What was once a vast network of interconnected lakes has been reduced to a system of canals and small lagoons, surrounded by urban sprawl and crisscrossed with human activity. The water that flows through these channels carries the burden of a modern city, bringing with it pollutants and problems that the ancient ecosystem never encountered. Urban runoff is perhaps the most persistent threat. Rain falling on the concrete and asphalt of Mexico City picks up oil, heavy metals, chemical residues, and countless other contaminants before flowing into the remaining waterways. The water becomes a cocktail of substances that no living system evolved to handle, creating chronic stress for all the organisms trying to survive there. Agricultural chemicals present another challenge. The farmland surrounding Xochimilco uses fertilizers and pesticides that inevitably find their way into the water system. Nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers fuel algae blooms that cloud the water and deplete oxygen levels. Pesticides create toxic conditions that can harm axolotls directly or disrupt the aquatic food webs they depend on. But perhaps the most visible problem is the explosion of algae that now characterizes much of the lake. The nutrient-rich water, warmed by climate change and lacking the natural filtration systems that once kept it clear, supports massive blooms of blue-green algae. These blooms create thick, scummy mats on the water surface, blocking sunlight and consuming oxygen as they decompose. The algae blooms create a cascade of ecological problems. They reduce water clarity, making it difficult for aquatic plants to photosynthesize. They alter the chemistry of the water, creating conditions that favor some species while harming others. They can produce toxins that are harmful to both aquatic life and humans. The clear, sweet water that once supported abundant life becomes murky and hostile. Invasive species add another layer of complexity to the ecosystem struggles. Large fish like carp, tilapia, and bass have established populations in the lake system, either through deliberate introduction or accidental release. These fish are efficient predators and competitors that the native ecosystem had no experience with. They eat axolotl eggs, compete for food resources, and generally disrupt the ecological relationships that had developed over millions of years. The floating gardens, or chinampas, that once defined the character of Xochimilco face their own challenges in this changed environment. Many have been abandoned as families move away from agriculture toward urban employment. Those that remain active struggle with water quality issues that make traditional farming methods less effective. Yet there's hope to be found in the persistence of both the ecosystem and the people who care for it. Local farmers and conservationists are working to revive the chinampas system, recognizing its importance not just for agriculture, but for water purification and habitat conservation. The floating gardens, when properly maintained, act as natural filters that help clean the water and provide habitat for native species. Recent efforts have focused on creating refuge areas within the lake system where water quality can be improved and native species can find sanctuary. These areas use traditional chinampas agriculture combined with modern conservation techniques to create pockets of healthier habitat. It's a blend of ancient wisdom and contemporary science working together to address modern problems. Water treatment and filtration systems are being installed to reduce pollution inputs and improve water quality in critical areas. These systems use both technological solutions and natural processes, including constructed wetlands that mimic the filtering effects of natural marsh systems. The goal is to create stepping stones of cleaner water that can support native species while the larger ecosystem gradually recovers. Community involvement has been crucial to these conservation efforts. Local residents, many of whom are descendants of the original inhabitants of this watery landscape, bring traditional ecological knowledge that complements scientific understanding. They remember how the system functioned before the current problems developed, and they understand the subtle relationships between water, land, and life. Educational programs are helping to raise awareness about the importance of the lake ecosystem and the species it supports. Schools, community groups, and conservation organizations work together to teach people about axolotls, chinampas, and the unique cultural and ecological heritage of Xochimilco. The idea is that people will protect what they understand and value. Climate change adds another dimension to the challenges facing Xochimilco. Rising temperatures affect water chemistry and oxygen levels, while changing precipitation patterns alter the seasonal rhythms that the ecosystem depends on. These changes happen gradually but persistently, requiring long-term adaptation strategies rather than quick fixes. The economic pressures facing the region also influence conservation efforts. Tourism can provide incentives for maintaining the lake system, but it can also create additional stress through boat traffic, pollution, and habitat disturbance. Finding the right balance between economic development and ecological protection requires careful planning and community involvement. Despite all these challenges, the lake continues to support life. Native plants still grow in protected areas, native fish species persist in reduced numbers, and yes, wild axolotls still swim in the murky waters. They're survivors, these remnant populations, carrying the genetic memory of millions of years of evolution in this unique aquatic environment. The story of modern Xochimilco is ultimately a story about the resilience of life and the power of human determination to make things better. It's about ancient ecosystems adapting to modern challenges, traditional knowledge combining with contemporary science, and communities working together to protect what they value. The water may be murky now, but it still flows. The ecosystem may be stressed, but it still functions. The axolotls may be few, but they still swim, still regenerate, still carry forward the gentle wisdom that made them legends. In their persistence, they remind us that even damaged systems can heal, that even degraded environments can support life, and that with care and commitment, ancient waters might yet find their way back to health. Sometimes salvation comes not from going home, but from finding a new one. As the waters of Lake Xochimilco struggle to support their ancient inhabitants, conservationists have begun looking elsewhere, seeking new environments where axolotls might thrive while their traditional habitat recovers. It's a story of adaptation and hope, of scientific creativity meeting biological resilience. The search for suitable axolotl habitat has led researchers to some unexpected places. Abandoned quarries have become lakes, urban parks have developed pond systems, and research institutions have created artificial wetlands. Each potential new home is evaluated carefully, tested for water chemistry, temperature stability, food availability, and the absence of predators that might threaten introduced axolotl populations. One of the most promising sites has emerged near Mexico's National Autonomous University, where an abandoned stone quarry has filled with groundwater to create a surprisingly pristine lake. The water is clear and clean, fed by natural springs and protected from urban runoff by its isolated location. It's like a hidden oasis in the midst of Mexico City's sprawl, a pocket of possibility in an increasingly challenging landscape. This quarry lake has become a natural laboratory for studying axolotl conservation and ecology. Researchers have introduced carefully monitored populations of axolotls, tracking their survival, reproduction, and adaptation to their new environment. Radio transmitters allow scientists to follow individual animals, learning about their movement patterns, habitat preferences, and breeding behaviors in this novel ecosystem. The early results have been encouraging. The introduced axolotls have shown good survival rates and have begun reproducing successfully. The lake's ecosystem is supporting them well, providing adequate food sources and suitable breeding sites. It's not exactly the same as their ancestral home in Xochimilco, but it's proving to be a viable alternative. But creating new axolotl habitat isn't just about finding suitable water bodies, It's about understanding the complex ecological relationships that these animals need to thrive. Axolotls require specific types of aquatic vegetation for egg laying, particular kinds of invertebrates for food, and water conditions that fall within narrow ranges of temperature, pH, and oxygen levels. Research teams have become experts in axolotl ecology, studying every aspect of their habitat requirements and life history. They've learned which aquatic plants provide the best egg-laying substrates, which invertebrate prey species are most nutritious, and how different environmental factors influence axolotl health and reproduction. This knowledge is crucial for creating successful new populations. The process of establishing new axolotl populations is delicate and requires careful planning. Researchers can't simply move animals from one place to another and hope for the best. They need to prepare the new habitat, establish appropriate food webs, ensure water quality is optimal, and gradually introduce axolotls in small numbers to minimize stress and maximize adaptation success. Genetic considerations add another layer of complexity to conservation efforts. The remaining wild axolotl populations in Xochimilco are genetically distinct from laboratory populations, having been isolated in their native habitat, while captive animals were bred in research facilities. Maintaining this genetic diversity is crucial for the long-term success of conservation efforts. New populations need to include axolotls from different genetic lineages to maintain the diversity that evolution has created over millions of years. This requires careful breeding programs that track genetic relationships and ensure that new populations aren't started with closely related individuals that might suffer from inbreeding problems. The involvement of local communities has been essential to the success of new habitat creation. People living near potential axolotl sites need to understand and support conservation efforts. This involves education about the importance of axolotls, training in habitat protection, and sometimes economic incentives for people to participate in conservation activities. Some of the most successful new habitat projects have combined axolotl conservation with other community benefits. Constructed wetlands that provide axolotl habitat can also help with water purification and flood control. Educational centers at conservation sites can provide tourism, revenue, and environmental education opportunities. It's conservation that works for both axolotls and people. The traditional Chinampas agriculture of Xochimilco has inspired some innovative approaches to creating new axolotl habitat. Researchers are experimenting with modified Chinampas systems that combine traditional farming methods with modern conservation techniques. These systems can provide both agricultural products and axolotl habitat, creating economic incentives for habitat protection. Technology is playing an increasing role in monitoring new axolotl populations and their habitats. Remote sensing systems track water quality in real time. Automated cameras monitor axolotl behavior and reproduction, and genetic analysis helps researchers understand how new populations are adapting to their environments. It's high-tech conservation in service of one of evolution's most ancient success stories. The creation of new axolotl habitat also serves as a model for other conservation efforts. The techniques being developed for axolotls can be applied to other endangered aquatic species, and the lessons learned about habitat restoration and species translocation have broader applications in conservation biology. Climate change considerations are built into the planning for new axolotl habitats. Researchers are looking for sites that will remain suitable as temperatures rise and precipitation patterns change. They're also designing systems that can be adapted and managed actively to maintain optimal conditions even as the environment changes around them. Perhaps most importantly, the search for new axolotl homes represents a shift in thinking about conservation. Instead of simply trying to preserve existing habitats, conservationists are actively creating new ones. It's proactive rather than reactive conservation, anticipating future challenges and preparing solutions before they're desperately needed. The success of these new habitat projects offers hope not just for axolotls, but for conservation in general. It demonstrates that with sufficient knowledge, planning, and community support, it's possible to create new homes for endangered species. It shows that conservation can be creative and forward-looking, finding innovative solutions to complex problems. As new axolotl populations become established in their artificial but suitable homes, they carry with them the genetic and behavioral wisdom of millions of years of evolution. They're pioneers, these relocated axolotls, exploring new waters with the same gentle curiosity that characterized their ancestors. They remind us that home isn't always about returning to where you came from. Sometimes it's about finding where you belong. In a world obsessed with growing up, axolotls chose to stay curious. They've become teachers without trying, gentle philosophers who demonstrate through their very existence that there might be wisdom in refusing to accept the limitations that others take for granted. Their lessons reach far beyond the biology textbooks and research journals, offering quiet insights about resilience, adaptability, and the courage to remain soft in a hardening world. The first lesson is perhaps the most profound. Growing older doesn't have to mean growing rigid. While most animals follow predictable developmental pathways, accepting the trade-offs that come with maturity, axolotls found a way to keep the best of both worlds. They achieved sexual maturity and reproductive success while maintaining the flexibility, regenerative capacity, and wonder of youth. This neoteny isn't just a biological curiosity, it's a life strategy that has served them well for millions of years. By refusing to fully metamorphose, they retained abilities that most animals lose. The capacity to regrow lost parts, the flexibility to adapt to changing conditions, the openness to new experiences that comes with never quite finishing the growing up process. There's something deeply appealing about this approach to life. In human terms, it might translate to maintaining curiosity throughout our lives, staying open to learning and growth, refusing to become so set in our ways that we lose the ability to adapt and change. The axolotl reminds us that maturity and wonder aren't opposites. They can coexist beautifully. Their regenerative abilities offer another profound lesson. Healing doesn't have to mean settling for less. When we're injured, we typically form scars, permanent reminders of damage that provide functional repair but not perfect restoration. Axolotls refuse to accept this compromise. They insist on complete healing, on rebuilding rather than merely patching, on restoration rather than resignation. This approach to healing requires patience, something that axolotls have in abundance. They don't rush the regenerative process or try to force quick fixes. Instead, they allow their bodies the time needed to properly rebuild, trusting in biological processes that unfold over weeks and months. It's healing as meditation, restoration as art, patience as wisdom. The implications extend beyond physical healing to emotional and psychological restoration. Perhaps there's wisdom in refusing to accept that damage must be permanent, that we must simply learn to live with our wounds. Maybe there are ways to approach personal healing with the same patient completeness that axolotls bring to physical regeneration. Their relationship with their environment offers lessons about adaptation and resilience. Axolotls evolved in a very specific ecological niche, but when that niche began to change, they found ways to survive. They've shown remarkable flexibility in laboratory settings, adapting to artificial environments while maintaining their essential character. This adaptability comes partly from their neoteny, their retention of juvenile flexibility throughout life. But it also reflects a deeper biological wisdom, the understanding that survival sometimes requires changing how you live while maintaining who you are. Axolotls in research laboratories are still fundamentally axolotls, even though their environment is completely different from the ancient lakes where they evolved. For those of us navigating rapidly changing world conditions, there's wisdom in this approach. How do we adapt to new circumstances while maintaining our essential nature? How do we remain flexible enough to survive change while staying true to our fundamental values and characteristics? The axolotl's gentle nature in the face of adversity offers another lesson. Despite facing extinction in their native habitat, despite being subjected to countless research procedures, despite living in artificial environments far from their evolutionary home, they maintain their characteristic calm and curiosity. They don't become aggressive or defensive, they remain approachable and cooperative. This gentleness isn't weakness, it's a kind of strength that allows them to thrive in situations that might destroy more rigid or reactive species. Their cooperative nature has made them invaluable research partners, contributing to scientific knowledge that could benefit countless other species. Their willingness to participate in their own study has made them teachers and healers for others. Perhaps there's human wisdom here about how to respond to difficult circumstances. Instead of meeting challenges with aggression or withdrawal, maybe there's power in maintaining openness, curiosity, and willingness to cooperate in finding solutions. The axolotl demonstrates that you can be both gentle and resilient, both cooperative and strong. Their retention of wonder throughout life might be their most important lesson. Axolotls approach their world with the same curiosity and openness that characterizes young animals of many species. They investigate new stimuli, explore their environment, and maintain an apparent interest in the world around them that never seems to fade with age. This perpetual curiosity serves them well in changing environments. Instead of becoming set in rigid behavioral patterns, they remain flexible and responsive to new situations. Their wonder keeps them learning, adapting, and growing throughout their lives. In our human context, this might translate to maintaining intellectual curiosity, emotional openness, and the willingness to be surprised by life. The axolotl suggests that wonder isn't just for children. It's a life skill that serves us well at any age. Staying curious keeps us learning, growing, and adapting throughout our lives. Their story also teaches us about the relationship between individual and community well-being. Wild axolotls are struggling because their community, their ecosystem, is degraded. Their individual regenerative abilities can't overcome systemic environmental problems. Their survival depends not just on their own remarkable capabilities, but on the health of the world around them. This lesson has obvious applications to human society. Individual resilience and healing capacity are important, but they're not sufficient if the larger systems we depend on are failing. The axolotl reminds us that personal well-being and community health are intimately connected, that caring for ourselves means caring for the world we live in. Finally, axolotls teach us about hope. Despite facing extinction, despite living in degraded environments, despite countless challenges, they persist. They continue to regenerate, to reproduce, to carry forward the biological wisdom of millions of years of evolution. They're living proof that life finds ways to continue, that healing is possible, that renewal can happen even in the most challenging circumstances. Their quiet persistence offers hope, not just for their own species, but for all of us facing uncertain futures. They remind us that resilience isn't just about surviving. It's about maintaining the capacity for growth, healing, and wonder, even in difficult times. They show us that sometimes the most profound strength comes not from fighting change, but from adapting to it while maintaining our essential nature. Every axolotl carries in its cells a quiet question. What if healing never had to end? As we reach the end of our gentle journey through their world, this question lingers like morning mist over still water, full of promise and possibility. The axolotl's gifts to science and to our understanding of life itself are still being unwrapped, their implications still unfolding like the slow growth of regenerating tissue. The future that axolotl research points toward is one where the boundaries between possible and impossible become beautifully blurred, where losing a limb might be an inconvenience rather than a tragedy, where damaged organs could rebuild themselves, where the aging process might be slowed or reversed by reactivating the regenerative programs that axolotls never forgot how to use. In laboratories around the world, scientists are already beginning to translate axolotl wisdom into practical therapies. Early clinical trials are testing growth factors isolated from axolotl tissue, gene therapies designed to mimic axolotl regenerative pathways, and tissue engineering approaches inspired by the blastema. The results are preliminary but promising, suggesting that the dream of human regenerative medicine isn't fantasy but an emerging reality. The implications reach into every corner of medicine. Imagine treatments for heart disease that involve regrowing damaged cardiac muscle rather than managing chronic dysfunction. Picture therapies for spinal cord injuries that restore complete function by rebuilding severed neural pathways. Envision approaches to stroke recovery that regenerate brain tissue rather than compensating for permanent damage. These possibilities aren't limited to dramatic injuries or diseases. The everyday wear and tear of aging might be addressed through therapies that maintain or restore the body's regenerative capacity. Joint cartilage could be regrown instead of replaced, skin could heal without scarring, and organs could maintain their youthful function throughout extended lifespans. But the axolotl's gifts extend beyond medical applications. Their approach to life, their retention of flexibility and wonder throughout their existence offers a different model for how we might age. Instead of accepting that growing older means growing rigid, we might learn to maintain the curiosity and adaptability that serve axolotls so well. The conservation challenges facing wild axolotls also point toward important futures. Their story illustrates both the fragility of specialized ecosystems and the possibility of creating new habitats for endangered species. The techniques being developed to establish axolotl populations in novel environments could be applied to countless other conservation challenges. Climate change, habitat destruction, and species extinctions are reshaping the biological world in unprecedented ways. The axolotl conservation model suggests that we don't have to be passive observers of this transformation. We can actively create new habitats, establish new populations, and give species the tools they need to survive in changing conditions. The integration of traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation science, demonstrated in the Chinampas restoration projects around Lake Xochimilco, offers a template for addressing environmental challenges worldwide. Indigenous and traditional management practices, combined with contemporary scientific understanding, might provide solutions that neither approach could achieve alone. Technology will play an increasingly important role in both axolotl research and conservation. Advanced genetic tools are revealing the molecular basis of regeneration with unprecedented detail. Environmental monitoring systems provide real-time data on habitat conditions. Artificial intelligence helps analyze complex patterns in regenerative biology and ecosystem function. These technological advances are accelerating the pace of discovery and application. What once took decades of research might now be accomplished in years or months. The gap between laboratory discoveries and clinical applications is shrinking, bringing the promise of regenerative medicine closer to reality. Yet perhaps the most important future that axolotls point toward is a shift in how we think about life itself. They remind us that the limitations we accept as natural and inevitable might not be so fixed after all. The boundaries between young and old, damaged and whole, possible and impossible might be more flexible than we imagine. This shift in perspective could influence not just medicine and conservation, but how we approach personal growth, social change, and cultural evolution. If biological systems can regenerate and renew themselves throughout life, perhaps human institutions and communities can do the same. Maybe the capacity for renewal and regeneration isn't limited to individual organisms, but extends to larger systems and societies. The axolotl story also reminds us of the importance of maintaining diversity, not just genetic diversity within species, but diversity of approaches, perspectives, and possibilities. Their neoteny represents an alternative developmental strategy that has proven successful under specific conditions. In a rapidly changing world, we need multiple strategies, diverse approaches, and the flexibility to adapt as circumstances change. Educational implications are equally profound. If regenerative capacity can be maintained or restored throughout life, then our understanding of human development, aging, and potential might need fundamental revision. Perhaps the learning capacity, neural plasticity, and adaptability associated with youth aren't inevitably lost with age, but could be maintained through approaches inspired by axolotl biology. The economic implications of successful regenerative medicine would be transformative. Healthcare systems focused on managing chronic conditions might shift toward restoring health and function. The costs of long-term care for aging populations might be reduced if regenerative therapies can maintain health and independence throughout extended lifespans. But beyond all the practical applications and medical breakthroughs, the axolotl whispers something deeper about the nature of hope itself. In their quiet persistence, their gentle regeneration, their refusal to accept that damage must be permanent, they remind us that healing is always possible, that renewal can happen even in the most challenging circumstances. They've survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions, adapted to changing climates and evolving ecosystems, and now they're helping us unlock secrets that could transform human medicine and conservation. They carry forward the patient wisdom of millions of years of evolution while contributing to futures we can barely imagine. As we drift toward the end of our time together, perhaps we can carry with us some of the axolotl's gentle certainty that healing is possible, that growth can continue throughout life, and that the capacity for renewal and regeneration might be far more widespread than we ever dared to hope. They remind us that sometimes the most profound gifts come in the smallest, gentlest packages, that the answers to our deepest questions might be swimming quietly in shallow water, smiling their perpetual smiles and demonstrating that miracles can be as natural as breathing. And so, we drift back to the surface of our gentle exploration, leaving behind the quiet waters where axolotls smile, their eternal smiles. We've swum through ancient myths and modern laboratories, through the tragedy of disappearing lakes and the hope of regenerating tissue. We've witnessed creatures that chose to remain forever young, forever curious, forever capable of healing. Perhaps there's something we can learn from their gentle persistence, their refusal to give up the gifts of youth, their quiet insistence that what is broken can always be made whole again. In a world that often feels too quick to heal, too ready to accept permanent damage, axolotls whisper a different story, one of patience, of possibility, of second chances written in living tissue. Tonight, as you settle into rest, maybe you'll carry with you some of their peaceful resilience. The knowledge that healing happens in its own time, that staying curious and open might be the greatest wisdom of all, and that sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest, gentlest teachers. And if you found any peace in tonight's quiet journey, if the wonders of regeneration and resilience helped you drift toward your own restoration, we'd be honored if you follow us for more gentle expeditions through the mysteries of science. Thanks for joining us here at Sleep Science. Like the axolotl in its ancient waters, may you find perfect rest in your own perfect moment. Sleep well.